You're listening to the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast presented by Kraus Health, the exclusive healthcare partner of Syracuse Athletics.
Well, welcome back to another edition of the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast, and I'm pleased to have a guest that's been on the show before, but it's been a little while. Brendan Marks of The Athletic is back with us today. Brendan, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me. It has been a while.
It has been a little while, and that's my fault. But I knew I wanted to get you back on because it was very recently, like a week or maybe 2 weeks ago, you took on the daunting task of trying to predict the standings or the finish for the ACC next year. You're doing it in August. And I'm not sure even the ACC coaches all are completely sure who they're going to have on their rosters. And B, you're doing it in a year where the ACC is expanding to 18 teams. I mean, that's too shy of the English Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee you that people who are English Premier League fans know more about the teams that are coming in from relegation than I do about the new teams who came in. So it was a lot of research, a lot of looking at all of it. And no, I mean, that's the funny thing is we put it in, and I think in the lead of the story, we said coaches, teams are going on their preseason tours. Coaches have got to feel pretty good about the state of their rosters and hopefully having some stability. And I say that, and in the time since the article was posted, North Carolina has both added and lost a player. So nothing is stable, nothing is permanent, but we're doing the best we can.
Well, I think Syracuse added a player too since
Right.
your article came out. Peter Masterovich from France. Congratulations to you to taking on this challenge, man. 18 teams. How did you even begin going about trying to parse these out? Because, okay, I get that you're going to put Duke at number one, but after the first two or three, I mean, a lot of these teams got to be looking the same, right?
Yeah, to be completely honest with you, I tried to start out with what I knew from memory from last year and what I knew from the spring about, okay, who's coming back, who left, what are the holes, what needed to be filled, what I remembered from the transfer portal, and tried to come up with like a preliminary 1 through 18. Some of those are written in pen, most of those are written in pencil. And then as we started going through and looking at all of the numbers, looking at all of the data, seeing, okay, this team doesn't have a single player who's made 53s in their career. Not great. Or wow, this team has, Louisville, for example, I knew they had added so many pieces in the transfer portal, but I don't think I fully appreciated the breadth of what they were bringing in. It's easy to say we're flipping the entire roster, but I didn't appreciate quite the quantity of production that they were bringing in until you actually start getting into it. So certainly had a rough idea of where things were going to end up. And then as we filtered in the data and made some calls, talked to some coaches, talked to some people around the league, just trying to figure out where they thought people might end up, it sort of illuminated the list. And we did end up, I would say, from the preliminary, switching a good couple of schools, moved a few up, dropped a few. So the ones at the top stayed the same, and unfortunately, the ones at the bottom mostly did too.
Now, the ones at the top, this isn't going to be a surprise to most followers of the ACC over the years. You got Duke 1 and Carolina 2. But these are two teams in completely different places in terms of the type of roster and who they've brought in. I mean, Duke's bringing in the number one rated recruiting class in the country. Carolina, not so much. Why can't I get Duke 1? Why Carolina 2?
Yeah, I think, like you said, Duke number one was kind of an easy call. You're bringing in Cooper Flagg. He is the, preseason everything in the world. And I think he's going to be, in terms of what I'm expecting from like circus-like coverage, the zoo that's going to be following Duke this year, it'll be the closest thing Duke has had, maybe that college basketball has had since Zion Williamson, just in terms of like a singular freshman phenomena. Cooper could be the best player in the league by the end of the season. But at the start of the season, the best player in the league is RJ Davis. He's going to be the preseason. He's going to be the preseason player of the year. He has played more minutes by himself, than like half of the minutes that certain schools have coming back. He's played all on his lonesome. The thing that I think he had to do a little bit of everything for North Carolina this year, and the roster around him I think he's going to be able to be a little bit more of a playmaker than just a pure scorer this year, which should hopefully alleviate some of the burden in those make or miss games. In the NCAA tournament, he had his first game all year where he didn't make a three, was clearly pressing against Alabama, really struggling. I think the pieces they've added in the backcourt, Elliot Cadeau's back, Seth Trimble is back after a 2-week stay in the transfer portal. They do go out and they add a guy, Ian Jackson, who is a top 10 recruit, can play at the two, can handle the ball a little bit, play some three. So they have the pieces. The thing with North Carolina that scares me is a little bit like Duke last year. I don't really know what they're going to do in the front court. The eternal son, Armando Bacot, is finally gone. He's got his AARP card. He's out of college basketball, and they don't necessarily have a clear-cut answer there. But I think with RJ Davis, that getting him back for a final season is better than anything else North Carolina could have possibly done in the transfer portal. If he was a transfer portal addition, we'd say he's the best transfer portal addition in the country. So getting him back, I think, just gives North Carolina a really high floor. And then the team will flip after that. But one more year with RJ Davis, we'll see how far he can take them.
You mentioned Louisville earlier, and it's okay to say that they've brought in all these transfers and they've flipped the roster, and I get all that, Brendan. But you really believe in what Pat Kelsey's doing there. You've got Louisville at 3, and they were terrible last year.
And none of those players are back.
I know, but even still, if they finish as high as you say they might, this is Coach of the Year work by Pat Kelsey.
I think Louisville, not just in the ACC, but nationally, is going to be the test case for how big a swing you can make in one offseason in the new era. This is a place that has resources, has a professional caliber facility, has the fan base, has a history. They've got the famous laundry. And the only thing they were missing were the players and a coach. And Kelsey is not everybody's favorite cup of tea, but the bare minimum of what he's done is he's brought energy back. He has seemed like he's enthused. He has won everywhere he's been. He has. And I think that the talent that he's assembled complements the way that he wants to play. Kelsey's teams get up their 3-point shots. I had a stat in the story. I think in 10 of 12 years that he's been a head coach, his teams have been like top 50 or top 75 in 3-point rate.
Right. And another stat you had, and my memory's fading as I get older, but this one stood out to me. Last year, his team at College of Charleston, 47% of their shots were from the 3-point line.
Right.
That's insane.
And it is insane, but then you go and you look at who he's added, and it's adding a ton of players who not just have an efficient 3-point shot, but who are hitting them at a high clip too. And so again, it is going to be sort of the eternal question. Like, can you flip a roster? If you inject NIL and a new coach into a program, can you flip a roster in one season? I mean, this is, to me, again, I understand the pieces are going to take some time to coalesce. There's absolutely an NCAA tournament team here. 100%. I mean, you're talking about a guy, Edwards just led James Madison to the tournament, basically all by himself. I think this team could really surprise some people. There are going to be some bumps, but they tend on paper to look like they'll fit Kelsey's style. And I think that there is a little bit of a pride factor too, in terms of, restoring Louisville to what it was before the last couple of seasons.
You weren't afraid to make some interesting picks here, because the very next one on your list, right after Louisville, and when I saw Louisville, I was like, whoa, Louisville. Then at number 4, you got a team that lost its starting center, a guy you described as a walking double-double. They lost a first-round NBA draft pick, and they lost maybe one of their best perimeter guys to the transfer portal. I'm talking about Norchad Omier, Keyshawn George, and Wooga Poplar of Miami. They're all gone, and you've got Miami 4th in the league. Brendan, I think it's upside down.
I think this is the point. I think those top 3 schools in terms of top end talent, I think they are a little bit of a rung above the rest of the league.
Okay.
I think that those 3, I feel pretty good about all of that. Duke and North Carolina, especially, I think are sort of in a tier of their own. I think Louisville, has NCAA tournament potential. And if they're not challenging for that, I think Louisville fans will be dissatisfied with Kelsey's first season. Miami is where I think you can start to really pick some bones and say, okay, what are we thinking here? Let me at least explain my rationale here.
Please do.
because I understand that it doesn't necessarily look great. As you know, Jim Larinaga, offensive guru, I love the way that his teams play. I love, ever since he went a couple of years ago when they had Sam Wardenberg as their stretch five, and he made this full-on pivot from, big, athletic, I'm going to play basically four centers at a time, has completely reversed course and now plays this small ball, free-flowing, three-point heavy style of basketball. You do lose some of those guys, but you get back Nigel Pack. Again, I think we're underestimating how valuable a guy like that is, even with some injuries that he's been through. It's just been a model of consistency. He is the last remnant from that postseason success.
Yes, the Final Four from 2 years ago.
It's crazy to believe that already the entire roster has turned from that. And he was the newcomer on that squad. So he's still around. Matthew Cleveland, who I think has proven that he can be a high-level ACC starter. He's maybe not going to win you a bunch of games, but he's not going to lose you a bunch of games. The guy who I'm really excited about here, and I don't think we've heard a ton about him yet just because of some of the other caliber of recruits have come into the ACC this year, is Jaleel Bethea. I think
fans are well aware.
Yes. I mean, when you're talking about some of the best freshmen in the league, you've got Cooper Flagg, obviously. You've got Ian Jackson down at North Carolina. You've got Donnie Freeman at Syracuse. I know we're going to talk about Donnie. And then you've got Jaleel. Those I think are, if you're making an all ACC rookie team, that's a pretty good starting place, is those four guys.
Right.
I absolutely loved him on the recruiting trail. This is a little bit of my own personal bias. I think he's sensational. I think the sports kid is also an underrated addition for them. And the other thing is, I think the transfers that they brought in, Jalen Blackman is a guy who was one of the best scorers in all of Division I basketball last year. You put him around Pack, around Bethea, you've still got Cleveland. Those four, in terms of perimeter capability, I think gives you a pretty high floor with a coach like Larinaga. Lynn Kidd at Virginia Tech, again, when he's available, has been really good. They go and they get the kid from ECU, Blackman. I like the additions to round it out. Larinaga never plays a deep roster. You put that all together to me. I think, again, tournament caliber team. They give people trouble because they play a different style. Could they bomb and have injury issues and be plagued by depth and end up 16th? Probably. But I'm choosing to buy Larinaga, buy Nigel Pack, buy Bethea, and buy those transfers really filling their roles.
It's interesting. As opposed to you really liking Louisville and Miami, a team that I like is actually you have them pretty high too. At 5. My dark horse this year is going to be Wake Forest. You mentioned RJ Davis might be the best player in the league. I might counter Hunter Salas is going to challenge him for that, or at least among the veteran guys. Cooper Flagg might be the best guy in the league. But Hunter Salas comes back, Efton Reed, Cam Hildreth, is just a great consummate, team player. I like Wake a lot. And I tell you what, I'm over watching Steve Forbes since he came into the ACC. Every year, I'm more and more sold on how this guy gets all that he can out of the talent on hand.
I agree. I think he's one of the most underrated coaches in the league, probably in the country. And this is the most returning talent that he's had since he's been in Winston-Salem. In terms of a singular top-end guy like Salas and that trio you talked about, having those three starters back. Don't sleep on Parker Fredrickson either, who I thought had started to develop into a pretty decent, shooter by the end of the season too. It's really funny. I down at Peace Jam this year, I was sitting next to Steve Forbes, and I told him that we were going to be doing this project. And I was like, tell me a little bit about the new guys. How are they all fitting? And I was like, we've got to list our top 100 transfers, and none of the guys you brought in are ranked in our top 100. And he was like, well, you'd think that people would look at the transfers I've gotten the past couple of years and maybe give them a couple of points of a boost in the rankings by now. But, I do think, again, some of these guys he's brought in are interesting. Spillers sounds like he's been a really encouraging addition, somebody who could start at the 4 next to Efton Reed. Maybe eventually that becomes a position that's filled by Omaha Bielu, the former 5-star who comes from Iowa State, but he's been dealing with some health stuff. We'll see, how long it takes him to get fully ramped back up. But Spillers is more than capable in the interim. Again, you talk about those guys they bring in. They've got, he brings in Juke Harris, which is somebody who's a homegrown, can you actually build not just through the portal, but through the high school ranks too. And again, Hunter Salas was as good as anybody in the league last year. He was one of those individual game winners. So, the thing is, Steve has been so close to the tournament the last couple of years and has always been right on the wrong side of the bubble. I think this is the year that they absolutely have the talent to get in. But also, I do wonder if they don't get in with this group, if some of the conversation in Winston-Salem is going to change a little bit. I don't think it should. I think the situation he inherited, being the only Power Five coach who changed jobs during the pandemic, like you can't understate the ascent that this program has already made with him. I think this is the year they take that next step and get in. And I think, like you said, Salas is a big reason why.
Okay, we're 15 minutes into a Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast here with Brendan Marks, and we've yet to talk about Syracuse basketball. So we're going to skip a few teams. This is like the old Sunday rebroadcast of Notre Dame football games with Lindsey Nelson. We skip ahead to further action in the third quarter. Irish have the ball at the 20. We're going to skip ahead or skip down. You got Syracuse 11th. And that's 11 out of 18, we'll remind folks.
Not 11 out of 12 or 15 yet.
Hey, hey, listen, when I first, when I was in college, the ACC didn't have 11 teams. So why 11? Let's start there.
Yeah, so I would probably start with the caveat that, like you said, we skip from 5 down to 11. I think, and of that mix of teams from 6 to 11, I think is pretty nimble. I think that group, I think there's a lot of flexibility. You have a team like Georgia Tech, who I personally am very high on. I put them 7th, but I really like what Damon Stoudemire is doing there. You've got a team like Pitt. You've got Clemson. You've got NC State, who obviously lost a lot, but now has a little bit of experience. They do bring some guys back. If you wanted to quibble with me and put Syracuse any of those spots, I would 100% buy it. The thing to me, I think, is that I just watched two different coaches do what Red Autry did in John Shire and Hubert Davis down in North Carolina, where they had to replace, that first year, you're doing what you can. And they went about it very different ways. Hubert Davis kind of did the Red Autry thing and had mostly an inherited roster where he didn't get to do a ton of flexibility. Carried that into one more year, and that didn't work out so well for him. I think this roster obviously has a lot more of Red's fingerprints on it than last year did, not having Judah around being the biggest reason why. I like the additions that they made in the portal. Eddie, I wish that Syracuse had a guy like Eddie Lampkin, like an actual big man for the past 6 seasons. I feel like it's been a while since they've had one. Yeah. I remember I watched him play last year when Colorado played at USC. And I remember watching him play at TCU. Like Eddie Lampkin, if he's around, if Naheem and he, in theory, give Syracuse size that it hasn't had in a really long time. To me, I just wonder if they're still missing a piece. Like one top high-level guy, and I'm not sure that either Chris Bell or J.J. Starling can be one of those first-team all-ACC guys who can take over a game in the last 4 minutes and get you a win.
Interesting.
I think there's some nice depth here. I think the pieces fit. There are a lot of guys who have played a lot of minutes. If J.J. had played, an extra 2 games, he'd have been over 2,000 minutes as well, and Syracuse slides up in that proverbial pecking order. But overall, I like this team. I just don't know that it has that top end guy who can, if it's a 4-point game with 2 minutes left, who's going to be able to make the tough bucket, help you get a stop, score again, and take that thing down to the wire. But if you wanted to quibble with me and say they should be anywhere from 11 to 6, I would buy that.
It's interesting. You have to focus on transfers and what teams are bringing in. You had mentioned that the ACC as a whole, and you mentioned this in your story, did not have a large number of highly rated transfers. It was part of your conversation you mentioned with Steve Forbes. I doubt Syracuse's transfers were rated that high, but in talking with the Syracuse coaches, they like the guys that they've brought in. I think, they really dug in and did some homework and some analytics work. For instance, you mentioned Eddie Lampkin. They seem to like Jaquan Carlos, the point guard from Hofstra. They really do.
Yeah.
And if he fits, he becomes a piece that can make the rest of the engine go.
If you have Carlos as your point next to JJ, and that's your backcourt, and then you've got Chris Bell and you've got Davis, the kid from Delaware, out on the wing, that's a pretty good 4.
Not bad.
And then you put Lampkin in there with Naheem, again, health dependent, but that's not bad. Again, that's the thing though. I don't know that any of the I'd be fascinated to know from your perspective, can JJ take that leap and become an all first team caliber guy, especially as we're talking about 18 teams now. It is going to be a deeper league. I think there's probably, 7 to 8 teams who have a reasonable chance of feeling good about making the tournament, maybe even down to 11. Can JJ make that leap? That's my question. I'm not totally sold, but if that materializes, absolutely.
I think it's a great question. I think he is definitely one of the keys to the team's success, him and Chris Bell.
Right.
Can either one of those guys, take that leap? The thing with JJ, and this is a stat I, have loved ever since the end of the season. Last year, through the first 9 games, he was shooting like 12% from 3-point range. And then he discovered meditation. He learned to relax. He got out of his own head. And for the rest of the year, he was a 37% 3-point shooter. 37% is really good. I mean, I know it's not like, maybe your top 3
No, it
in the
is.
league, but that's a good percentage. If he's shooting that and Chris Bell shooting what he did last year, they form quite a combo. But it'll be interesting. Can he do it without Judah Mintz there? Maybe having a pass first point guard in Jaquan Carlos helps. I don't know. We'll see. So you mentioned earlier you were down at Peach Jam. You hang around with the coaches. You're picking their brains. Did you talk to anybody about Donnie Freeman and how much how much should we expect to get to see from a McDonald's All-American?
Yeah, I mean, and I think I alluded to this in the story too, but Syracuse, as fans are probably woefully aware, has had a little bit of a NBA draft dry spell here.
They have.
Everybody I've spoken to about Donnie, I mean, I remember watching him last year at Peach Jam, but everybody I've spoken to, other coaches, there are NBA scouts down there who are allowed. He's one of the guys on the list who you have to stop and see in the ACC. And I think I put this in the story too. We'll see how long it takes to come together, but if he ends up being Syracuse's best or second best player, I don't think that would surprise me or anybody else who has high expectations for Donnie Freeman. As somebody who can do a little bit of everything offensively, who is an athlete, there's a lot of excitement about what he could do for Syracuse this year, potentially only for 1 year. I don't know if Syracuse fans would be happy or not happy about that.
Depend on how the year goes.
Probably a little bit of both. But I think he's going to be a really special player for them. And, on our Sam Vecini, our NBA draft expert, on his initial big board, had Donnie going in the lottery, had him going, I think, 12th overall. So there certainly is a lot of anticipation. And again, NBA scouts down at Peach Jam, they've got this book of guys who we got to see. And Donnie was in the books last year, and they're making their trips, and they're saying, who do we need to go see in the ACC? Okay, we need to go see Cooper Flagg. We need to go see the rest of the guys at Duke. We need to go see Donnie Freeman. We need to see Jaleel Bethea. Like, those are some of the highlights. And again, if the rest of those pieces we're talking about fill out around him, then certainly I think we're talking I put this in the piece. I think Syracuse can be an NCAA tournament team as well.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's a little bit more projection based than some of the others. But I certainly think that the pieces are there, especially with what you're saying about Carlos and how much the staff likes him. If he can get JJ and Chris their spots, if he can, take a ball handling load off Donnie, if Lampkin and McLeod can actually give you a post presence, why can't that team make the tournament?
It'll be interesting. We talk about Donnie Freeman, and I saw the Athletic Sam Vicini's predictions for the next year's draft too, and it'll be interesting if Donnie's getting drafted next year based on a decent freshman season, and it's still the potential, the stuff that the scouts are seeing now. Oh, he's 6'9", he's long, he's athletic, there's potential, or if it's because, wow, he just had a great freshman season. He's 14 points a game or something like that. I caution Syracuse fans, remember Chris McCullough. Chris McCullough, before he was injured in his freshman year, and he wound up going in the first round of the NBA draft despite a knee injury, he was averaging 9 points and about 7 rebounds a game. I think Donnie could put up those numbers and not be bad because you have JJ, Chris Bell, Eddie Lampkin, and I talked with Adrian Autry about 2-3 weeks ago. We talked about Donnie. He goes, we have guys. He liked the fact that Donnie's not going to be come in and thrust into this overwhelmingly huge role right away. he can do whatever he can.
Right.
But with Eddie, Chris, JJ, guys like that, they've got veteran guys to be like the building blocks.
Right. And I think, I could see it being similar role wise to a guy you mentioned earlier with Miami losing Keyshawn George last year.
Keyshawn last year. Yeah.
And he's a guy who was not in the top three on the scouting report necessarily because you did have a Pack and a Cleveland and a Poplar and a Norchad. You did have those guys. And so, there were the flashes. And that's what he ends up getting drafted in the first round for is the flashes. Um, again, if Donnie's averaging 14 points a game and shooting 36% from three and pulling down 6 or 7 rebounds a game, he gone.
Oh, no question. And Syracuse, by the way, is going to be good.
And very good, very good. But I think not having to force him into an immediate, sort of starring role and letting him get his legs under him, I think is probably beneficial for him in the long run and Syracuse.
All right. So that's about 10 minutes there on Syracuse, which we had to do. Before we get you out of here, Brandon, I want to ask you a few other questions about your predictions here. As you went on through this and you got down to 15, 16, 17, you had to feel really bad. You had to be like, really? I mean, like like a letter of apology to fans at like Stanford and FSU.
The one who I actually feel so bad for is Virginia Tech and
Virginia
Mike Young,
Tech.
because like if you look at what they lost and if they had kept it all, how good they could have been,
Mm.
like they could have been a really good team. And I struggle to see that. And he's a good coach and
Oh, yeah.
he's won in the ACC. Let's not forget, he beat Coach K for Coach K's last ACC championship title.
That's true.
Like Mike Young is a great offensive coach and he had players and he developed them over time. And so for all of them to sort of bail in one off season is tough. And then the other one I feel bad about is Florida State. And
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, man, that 2020 season, never having gotten to play it, like, I don't think that was, maybe there's some cosmic turning point energy there, but it has just been such a struggle since. And you look at Florida State, and they're at the bottom of our, basically every chart we've got in the story. They're at the bottom of the list in terms of returning production, in terms of three-pointers, in terms of returning talent, like. And again, that's a team that has always been long and athletic and difficult to play. And they're going to be tough again because he's a good coach. But like just the level of talent at Florida State has dropped relatively dramatically in a short period of time. So those are the two who I really feel bad for. Stanford's pretty much an empty cupboard, but I think Kyle Smith knew that when he was taking over the job. It's basically just Maxime Reynaud, who, thank God, they got him back. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I do, but I think, like we're talking about, those are, teams 15 to 18. Everybody above that should be at least competitive.
Okay.
And I think there's probably 10 or 11 teams who reasonably should be in the bubble conversation in February, which if you're the ACC, I think is a productive thing. But yeah, Syracuse, I think, is one of those that I could really see going either way. I'm sort of fascinated to see, without Judah especially, and how much of a role he commanded. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be fascinated to see what Red can do with a little bit more flexibility and with some of these new pieces he's brought in.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see what just an older, more experienced group, if that's going to have a difference too, because after Naheem went out last year with his injury, it was all sophomores. They had no seniors, no juniors playing. It was all sophomores. And now this year, he's got, grad students, seniors, like I think like 5 grad students and seniors, about 3 or 4 juniors. It's an old team.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to get you out of here on one last question. Actually, I'm going to commit a journalistic faux pas. I'm going to ask you a 2-part question.
Bang, give it to me.
All right. So after you finish the story, you did your list, you submitted it, and you like, that feeling when you're like, okay, it comes out on the Athletic website. You looked at it and you said to yourself, I think I might have got these guys wrong. And then the part 2 of the question is, I know I got these guys right. All right, which one are you most confident? It could be number 1 or it could be number 18. Which one are you most confident in? And which one, after you went back and looked at it, you said to yourself, I wish I could rewrite this. Maybe I need to call the editors.
That's a good question. One who I definitely felt bad putting them as low as I did, and I think they could surprise. They're just so young, but it's Notre Dame.
Oh,
I had Notre Dame 12th.
all right.
By the end of last year, I was saying to myself at the ACC tournament, this is a team that could go from being a Tuesday ACC tournament team to a Thursday ACC tournament team.
Mm.
And I don't think they did enough in the portal, but they did bring back the ACC Rookie of the Year, and they brought back Micah's son, and they go out and they add an absolute flamethrower from the Ivy League. And I think Micah, just in terms of pure coaching acumen, might be one of the 5 or 6 best coaches in the league. So putting them at 12 just feels kind of icky to me because I think they're going to be a lot better than that.
If they had kept Booth,
Yeah.
then much higher than 11 or 12, wherever you had him. But he transferred to Illinois, I think. I think it was Illinois.
Yeah. So I feel bad about having Notre Dame at 12. The one that I definitely feel good about is having Duke at number 1.
I figured.
And I mean, I got to go over and spend some time with John Shire a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, I've seen Cooper play for the past 2 years in grassroots. I saw him play last year in high school. Obviously, he was the talk of the town at USA Select Summer League. I mean, he is going to be so special. He is going to be so special. And the other pieces they've got, like Malik Brown has been awesome for them. They love Malik Brown. And I've been trying to track down the specific stat, and I haven't been able to totally make sure that I've got it right, but it's close enough that I don't mind workshopping it. I believe Duke is going to be the first team since Florida State in 2010 to not have a rotation player under 6'5".
Wow.
They're going to be gigantic. Gigantic. And you're talking about a situation where you could have Cooper Flagg, who's 6'9" with a 7'2" wingspan. You could have him at the 3. You could have Malik Brown at the 4. And you could have Kaman Malwalk, who just played for South Sudan in the Olympics, who is 7'2" with a 7'9" wingspan at the 5. I mean, that's a pro team.
Yeah, that is. That's
in terms of size. With 2 6'5" guards. Or 6'6" guards and Sion James, who they got from Tulane. So just the size, I think Duke could end up being one of the best defenses in the entire country. This team, I think, is going to look a lot more like Shire's first team with Derek Lively. When they played the defense they played, they won the ACC. And I think Cooper is obviously going to be a special transcendent offensive talent. So it's hard to know. Duke gets picked first every year and never ends up being first. But I do think that Cooper is, health dependent, obviously. Cooper is a special enough player to take Duke to some places that it otherwise wouldn't be able to go this year.
Yeah, I do think that's a special group that John Shire's assembled down there. It'll be really interesting just to see how good they can be. But the rest of the league, I just think it's wide open. And I know that's
the fun of it, right? That's what we want. We want it to be wide open.
Yeah. It'll be a lot of fun. And we all get to travel out to the Bay Area.
The SMU,
Dallas, and whatever, the Atlantic Coast Conference, ladies and gentlemen,
the All Coast Conference.
Hey, Brendan, listen, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me here. I love basketball talk, and it's great. And your article out there for anybody who wants to go find it. It's at The Athletic. It was just within the last 2 weeks. Brendan's predictions for the ACC 1 through 18. Again, Brendan, thanks for joining us here.
I appreciate you having me. Please leave nice notes in the comments, everyone.
Oh,
always.
The people that listen to this podcast are really nice, friendly people, Brendan. They will they'll be all thumbs ups for you. So to everybody out there, thank you for listening in. We'll see you next time on the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast.
Join us next time for the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast, presented by Crouse Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics.